The Thousand Year Blood War arc of Bleach tells the story of the Quincy Blood War, an enormous, all-consuming battle between the Shinigami and their allies, and the invisible Quincy Empire known as the Vandenreich, who, under their god king Yhwach, are hell-bent on restoring the fallen Quincy nation, and reshaping the very universe as we know it. Running for over 200 chapters, the Quincy Blood War is the biggest conflict the Gotei 13 has ever been involved in, at least to our knowledge, and the final arc of Bleach features a ton of different fights between the two sides as part of the eternal struggle for victory. And in today's video, well, I'm gonna rank every single fight from the manga version of the Thousand Year Blood War arc from worst to best. Now, originally I was going to include the anime here too, but since it's not finished yet, it doesn't really make sense to do so. Plus, once the anime adaptation is over, we can make a separate list and compare the two when all is said and done. Now, I'm fairly certain I've got every fight here, I really hope so. The criteria is pretty simple. Which fight do I like the best, and why? I'll be taking everything into account here. The artwork, the storytelling, the character development and reveals, the plot significance, it's all going to be here. But ultimately, yes, it is just my subjective opinion at the end of the day, so make sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments. So, this is probably going to be a long video. Settle in, grab a drink, maybe some snacks, and join me as we journey through the manga version of the Thousand Year Blood War arc from start to finish, and see which of the many fights of the final arc ends up being crowned the winner in the end. Before we get started on the video, as always, if you enjoyed it and you want to help support the channel and you want to see more just like this, then consider hitting subscribe down below as it really does help out. Also, before we get started, I do have a request. I've recently not quite rebooted, but reworked my games channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. I've plugged it over here plenty of times before, but just yesterday I released the first video in my new approach to this channel. It's an approach that I think works much better for me. It allows me to make content that I'm more personally engaged in, compelled by, and satisfied with, and I'm hoping that that will translate to you guys, the audience, as well. So to really streamline things and make things simpler, the videos uploaded to the channel will be split into only two different types, at least initially. There'll be shorter, more concise videos like the one I uploaded yesterday on the game Sword of the Sea, and then there will be longer, much more in-depth critiques, but to both of them I'll hopefully be able to bring the same level of insight and analysis and dedication that you've come to expect from me here on the Bleach channel as well. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, and we'll be talking about all different kinds of games over there as well, because that's really what I'm passionate about, not just Souls-likes, although of course I do absolutely love that genre as well, but I want to be talking about everything that I'm playing, that I'm enjoying, that I'm looking forward to. So if that does sound like something that you might be interested in, or if you just want to go and check it out anyway to help support me, it would really mean the absolute world. It would be a great big help. If you want to go and subscribe over there as well, I would greatly appreciate it, but of course I do appreciate that you might not want to subscribe until you've seen some of what I have to offer there. Right now I've only got one video under this new approach, though there are a few on there that are kind of cut from the same cloth already as well. So if you haven't done already, go ahead, check it out, have a look around. Your support would be really greatly appreciated. It would be wonderful to somehow get two channels up and running, especially when, however many years ago now, I didn't even think I'd be able to manage it with this channel. So yeah, your support would go a very, very long way, and it really does mean the absolute world. Enough of that, let's get back to talking about Bleach, because this is going to be a long enough video as it is, and of course there will be spoilers for the remainder of the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime in here as well, since we're looking at every single fight. So, I've got my drink, because I'm probably going to need it. I hope you have yours as well. And let's get started with our fight that's down in last place on this list. Taking place between chapters 594 and 597, the worst fight in the Thousand Year Blood War arc is Byakuya Kuchiki versus Sternritter L the Love, Pepe Wakabrada. This is a messy fight, as Pepe forces a lovesick Hisagi to attack Byakuya until miry zombies interrupt the battle halfway through, resulting in something of a non-conclusion as Pepe is then devoured by little Toto. Sadly, I really do think that Pepe had potential as a villain and was built up as such, but ends up being perhaps the worst thing possible: derivative. This fight feels like a rehash of Byakuya vs Zamari, only inferior in pretty much every single way. Ultimately, it's a disappointing conclusion to the second Quincy invasion, barely even giving Byakuya a reason to be there. Truth be told, I can't help but think the off-screened battle between Byakuya, Robert, Nanana, and Candice would have probably been more interesting. Although technically 3 chapters long, spanning from chapter 597 to chapter 599, Shutara Senjumaru vs Sternritter W, the Wind Nyanzol Wyzol, is an exercise in the power of the Zero Division as Senjumaru savagely kills her opponent in a single move. It's cool, sure, but ultimately this was a brief, forgettable duel between 2 characters that really we knew very little about, and we certainly didn't care about Nyanzol at all, having literally only just met him. He's a textbook example of one of the biggest issues with the Sternritter, that many of them feel like nothing more than throwaway fodder, and these days, this feels like a pointless stopgap between the arrival of the real big bads, the Schutzstaffel. Not only that, but while this fight does showcase Senjumaru's power, it does so in a totally nebulous and obfuscated way. It wouldn't be until the anime released many years later that we'd even have an idea, an inkling as to the extent of what Senjumaru really did, that she actually uses her Shikai Shigarami. The very first fight of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, Ichigo Kurosaki vs Asgiaro Eburn, takes place between chapters 481 and 484, and was genuinely exciting back in the day. These days, with the full scope of the arc laid out in front of us, it is pretty easy, I think, to forget about this fight. It doesn't really offer anything that future fights don't do in bigger and better ways, and Eburn isn't even a Quincy. Still, seeing that Quincy cross for the first time was an enormous deal. And of course, Eburn attempts to steal Ichigo's bankai, a plot point that would prove pivotal in the weeks and months to come. Plus, there's also Eburn's terrifying face, which is forever etched in my mind. Oh dear. What should have been the easiest layup in Bleach turned into something of an infamous disaster. Yes, the battle between the Zero Division and the Schutzstaffel, which ran from chapter 599 to chapter 604, was a huge disappointment, one that's been well documented. The setup is all there and handled really well. Oetsu blitzes the Schutzstaffel in a fantastic display of skill, only for Yhwach to resurrect his children stronger than ever. It's a dire moment for the Shinigami. The true battle is about to begin, and we get to see none of it. This showdown is all build-up and zero payoff, as the next time we see the Zero Division, they are lying defeated in pools of blood, despite being touted as stronger than the entire Gotei 13. Thankfully, famously, the anime made enormous sweeping changes here, and I expect this fight to rise up the ranks when we eventually get round to making that list. Many of us had waited years to see the Vice Captain of the 11th Division Yachiru Kusajishi finally in action, and yeah, she gets a fight all to herself in the 1000-Year Blood War arc against Sternritter V the Vanishing Point Gwenail Lee, which runs from chapter 570 to chapter 572. All in all, this isn't a bad fight, and it's cool to see Yachiru not only taking up the sword herself, but even revealing her Shikai Sanpo Kenju. Meanwhile, Gwenail Lee is okay as a villain at best, and I like how fleshed out and thoughtful his shrift is. That was a nice surprise. But ultimately he turns out to simply be a figment of the real villain Gremmy's imagination, lessening not only his impact, but really the relevance of this fight in general as it makes way for the true showdown to come. Ichigo Kurosaki's second battle with Yhwach in the wake of the revelation of Uryu's betrayal simply doesn't go as hard as it needed to here in the manga. Again, this is a messy confrontation with no clear through line and multiple characters getting involved from various different angles, and no one really feeling quite as effective as they perhaps should. There's no real sense of urgency despite this being perhaps the most urgent part of the entire story. Lasting from chapter 613 to chapter 619, don't get me wrong, the plot moves rapidly here, and there are some amazing moments. In fact, in regards to the plot, well, this sequence is one of my favourites of the entire arc. The death of the Soul King, the return of Aizen, the sacrifice of Ukitake. It is all great stuff. But ultimately that means the showdown between Ichigo and Yhwach is fragmented and unfocused, and we'll have to wait for them to meet again in order to get anything truly meaningful out of it. It's amazing, though, to see what the anime did with this fight, however, and the complete overhaul it received there. I've always been somewhat torn on this next fight, as from a purely character-driven perspective, I quite like what Sternritter A, the antithesis, Uryu Ishida versus Sternritter B, the balance, Ugram Hashwolf, has to say. But there's no doubt that this fight, which has been brewing for over 100 chapters at this point as the simmering rivalry and suspicion was born between these two, Quincy was an enormous letdown. Running from chapter 661 to chapter 681, what should have been really the second most prominent fight of the finale was totally relegated to the background. Despite this being in many ways Uryu's arc, his only real battle in the manga is borderline terrible. Inexplicably so, with Kubo choosing to cut away from this fight every single time something of consequence was actually about to happen, until time simply ran out. What we're left with is a few chapters of conversation and a single showdown of their respective shrift, both of which are so abstract that they don't play well in a visual medium. Here's hoping the anime has big, big plans for this fight, and I'm optimistic to say the least. The only concrete battle we actually get between the Zero Division and the Schutzstaffel in the manga is in the form of Oetsu Nimaya and Sternritter D, the death-dealing Askin Naklavar. Taking place across chapters 601 and 602, in my opinion, this is a slightly better version of the Senjumaru vs Nyanzol fight, in that we actually kind of know these two characters at least a bit. Of the Sternritter, Askin was already emerging as a fan favourite and a character people actually wanted to see in action, and the same goes for Oetsu as well, the man who created the concept of the Zanpakuto. And again, this is a decent, if very short and ultimately inconsequential fight. Askin uses his shrift, which at this point in the story is still quite abstract and weird. It isn't until the Varvelt arc that Kubo transforms the death dealing into something more palatable for the page, to put Oetsu on the ropes, but Oetsu eventually defeats him with Tenjiro's help, cutting Askin down in a really cool finale. I remember being really angry about Askin potentially dying this easily back in the day, but now I'm able to look on this duel a little more fondly, as one of the few bright spots, in fact, in the midst of the mess that was the invasion of the royal palace. Of the battles involving the captains who lost their bankai, none is more disappointing than Toshiro Hitsugaya versus Sternritter I, the Iron Kang-Do, which really feels like it was given the short end of the stick. Running from chapter 551 to chapter 554, in reality this fight is maybe a chapter long at best, with the rest of that time being given either to other concurrent showdowns or to lengthy explanations of the bankai retrieval process. The actual fight between Hitsugaya and Kang-Do isn't even bad, with Kang-Do attempting to fight the captain up close using his martial arts prowess, as all the while Hitsugaya regains more and more of his stolen bankai. However, Hitsugaya somehow defeats the Sternritter in a single move, freezing him in a gigantic cross. What's worst about this fight, though, is how contrived it all feels. Kang-Do just happens to arrive at the precise moment Hitsugaya gets his bankai back, and then, despite surviving the captain's ice unscathed, Kangdu is called back to headquarters and flippantly executed for virtually no reason. Now again, this was made slightly better in the anime, but more so than most other fights. This one feels the sting of a wasted character for sure. The battle between Kyoraku Shunsui and Sternritter N. Robert Akutrone during the first Quincy invasion might seem like an odd inclusion at first. In fact, it may feel like barely a fight at all, but the truth is, when all of the material is collated, as the fight runs from chapter 495 to chapter 511, it's frankly a more fully fleshed out showdown than many that precede it on this list. In fact, I quite like this battle. The opening features a nice piece of high-energy choreography as Robert moves in for the kill instantly, but Kyoraku dodges the attack and kicks the Sternritter in the gut before attempting to finish him off himself. Yet, in a truly shocking move, Robert quickly gets the upper hand by shooting out Kyoraku's eye using his Volston dish. But then Kyoraku is able to collect himself and deal a huge injury to the Sternritter as they trade blows back and forth. And of course, the fight ends in devastation, as Kyoraku senses the death of Yamamoto, enabling Robert to get the better of him, coldly gunning the captain down. Ichigo's long-awaited return to the battlefield was punctuated by his fight against the Bambis. Sternritter G the Glutton Lil Toto Lamperd, Sternritter P the Power Meninus Macallon, Sternritter T the Thunderbolt Candice Catnip, and Sternritter Z the Zombie Giselle Jewel. In the manga, this is a cool, albeit swift showcase of Ichigo's newfound, insurmountable power, as he fends off the four Sternritter with ease from chapter 581 to chapter 584, ending the battle with the explosive reveal of his new ability Getsuga Jujisho. This isn't a bad fight in the manga by any means, but it is expanded on in a big way in the anime, and made considerably more enjoyable by giving the Sternritter some more breathing room, allowing them to let loose against the main hero. The worst thing I can say about Soifon and Maurecchio Omaida vs Sternritter K BG9 is that it's simply too short. Running from chapter 548 to chapter 554, again, this is another battle that's too broken up, and spends too much time elsewhere to really give this fight the attention it deserves. This fight is full of awesome moments. Omaida really shows us his growth as he rages at BG9 for targeting his little sister. BG9, the strange robotic Sternritter, unveils an enormous minigun and tries to blow Omaida to pieces, but Soifon returns with a renewed and perfected Shunko, catching the bullets out from under BG9's nose. There's plenty of cool choreography on display here, but it's all just so rushed in the end, as BG9 overwhelms and destroys Soifon in a single chapter. And then a few chapters later, Soifon wakes up and blasts the robot with her recovered bankai, before he's then summoned back to headquarters and executed. Again, it's not bad, and I like what's here. I just wish there was more, and we got to spend more time with this showdown, as is the case with many others. Back in the day, I was so certain Kubo was gearing up for a round 2, with both BG9 and Kangdu, but it was never to be. After having his bankai stolen in the first invasion, Hitsugaya returns to the battlefield in the second invasion, alongside his vice-captain Rangiku Matsumoto, to take on Sternritter H the Heat Basby. But things don't go according to plan, and I like how desperate and dire this fight turns out to be. From chapter 547 to chapter 551, making this the first fight of the second invasion, Hitsugaya, despite his best efforts, despite teaming up with Matsumoto to concoct a smart little scheme, simply doesn't stand a chance, and is brutally bested by Basby, who introduces us to the soon-to-be iconic burner finger ability. Again, there's a nice back and forth here, and at least early on it reminds me of the days of the Rankar arc, before taking a sudden turn for the worse, as Hitsugaya is utterly trampled and nearly killed by the Sternritter. This battle and the Soifon vs BG9 fight helped to set the tone for the second invasion, but sadly it wasn't a tone the wider war was able to maintain for too long. Although their battle is short, running from chapter 512 to chapter 514, the first encounter between Ichigo and Yhwach at the end of the first Quincy invasion is very impactful and the perfect way to cap off perhaps Bleach's best ever sequence. An absolutely furious Ichigo charges Yhwach, only to be manhandled by the Quincy King and quickly put in his place. There's some weirdness here, implications of what feel like dropped plot lines, such as Yhwach talking about taking Ichigo back to the Vandenreich and putting him under their control, and Yhwach being unable to stay outside the Shadow Realm for too long at any one time, but this battle will be remembered for the reveal of Ichigo's Quincy ancestry, and the tease of the truth about Masaki. And of course the anime version of this showdown is pretty legendary. Right, from this point onwards, I feel like all of the fights left in the 1000-Year Blood War arc are at the very least good, if not great, and maybe even excellent towards the top of the list. And so in 20th place was a, frankly, very surprising but incredibly refreshing battle to see. And this is a battle that takes place wholly in the past, in the Everything But the Rain mini-arc, exactly again the kind of thing I wanted way more of during the 1000-Year Blood War arc, but this mini-arc, this mini-flashback arc was written brilliantly, and a major part of this mini-arc is the battle between Isshin Shiba and Masaki Kurosaki versus White. Of course, the progenitor of Ichigo's hollow powers, and really a fight, the fight, that determines the course of the main Bleach story. That makes it a fairly big deal. Running from chapter 530 to chapter 533, this isn't the longest battle in the world, but there is a true novelty to actually getting to see Isshin as captain of the 10th Division taking on an extraordinarily powerful hollow, an experiment of Aizen's, and actually managing to do pretty well. This is when we finally get to see Engetsu Shikai, where his sword is wreathed in flame. Now, I remember being a little disappointed that that was all Engetsu Shikai actually was, but regardless it's still cool to see, and it seems to have a pretty unique mechanic attached to it, where Isshin uses his blood to power it up. Now, this fight's also a little infamous in a sense in that Isshin's bankai is mentioned here explicitly in the manga, and all references to his bankai were then removed later in the anime, so whether we'll actually get to see it or not is still up in the air. But regardless, for as short as this fight is, the choreography is great. It's of course wonderful to see Masaki joining in, attempting to shoot White, and eventually using her ingenuity, to be honest, to allow White to bite her, and then to finish him off at point-blank range in what is a very, very cool cliffhanger, showing us exactly what Ichigo's mother is truly made of. It's a great coming together of Shinigami and Quincy to take on this monstrous, unnatural hollow, and all the while, Aizen, Gin, and Tosen are watching events play out from the shadows. In a recent video, I mentioned that in order to facilitate Unohana's appearance in the second Quincy invasion, we could theoretically remove the battle between Mayuri Kurotsuchi and Giselle Jewel, but well, that doesn't mean I don't enjoy this fight too. Running from chapter 588 to chapter 596. This fight involves a lot of moving parts, as both sides conjure up a zombie army, giving Kubo the chance to bring back a few familiar faces too. Yes, it's cool to see the Privarone Espada again, and to get closure on the secrets of Xyloporo's lab, but I don't know, the choices for the resurrected Arankar are a little underwhelming. On the flip side, the zombified Hitsugaya is maybe the most savage and efficient this character has ever been. Certainly, I didn't expect Kubo to go down the route he did with Giselle's character, but this is a good fight. It's an exercise in how to make a fight feel messy, but in a good, controlled way. It's just a shame about the ending, which is needlessly cut off and then given to us via a flashback a mere 2 chapters later. While it's certainly a disappointment in the end, there is a real novelty to seeing the 2 Vizard captains Rojiro Rose Otoribashi and Kensei Muguruma battling Stern Ritter S the Superstar, masked and masculine even if only for a few chapters. Running from chapter 559 to chapter 561, Rose and Kensei's time in the spotlight is criminally short-lived, and both of them are savagely defeated to make way for Renji, which is a huge shame. But at the same time, it's awesome to see both characters use their bankai, especially Rose's Kinshara Butodan, which was a brand new reveal. Masked Masculine feels egregiously overpowered as he quickly wipes out Hisagi, Ikkaku, and Yumichika before doing the same thing to these two captains, but his dynamic with James is fun all the same. Immediately following this battle is the return of Renji from the royal palace as he swoops in to rescue the two fallen captains and face off against Masked Masculine. From chapter 561 to chapter 564, Renji Abarai demonstrates his newfound power in an explosive showdown with the luchador Sternritter, initially manhandling him with such dramatic ease that it barely seemed to make any sense. Mask's subsequent transformations allow him to begin smacking Renji around, but ultimately it's all just a smokescreen for the big reveal. Renji's true bankai, So Zabimaru, which he attained during his training in the palace. It's a big moment for Renji, and a well-deserved definitive win over a powerful enemy after what feels like so very long. But I just wish it wasn't quite so one-sided, a sentiment that permeated a number of the fights in the first half of the second invasion. Next up is Shigekuni Genryusai Yamamoto vs Sternritter O the Overkill Driscoll Bursey, which takes place from chapter 503 to chapter 505. Of course, this isn't so much a fight as it is a vehicle for Yamamoto's raw rage and power, as he comes face to face with Sasakibe's killer. This fight manages to achieve an awful lot with so very little, as Kubo packs a ton of emotional heft into just a few pages. Sure, we don't know or even care about Driscoll, but he's not the point, he's just the target. He at least allows us to see Sasakibe's bankai, which in itself is really cool, but this fight is all about the head captain. We're treated to a succinct but excellent flashback showing some of the earliest days of Yamamoto and Sasakibe's relationship, before Yamamoto shrugs off all of Driscoll's lightning blasts to incinerate the Sternritter with a single definitive swing of his sword, reducing him to nothing but bone and then ash. It's cathartic for sure. Is it a little weird that all of the focus and development on Yamamoto and Sasakibe's relationship happens posthumously? Maybe, but it's worth it for this moment. Perhaps the single most uneven battle in the entire arc is the Gotei 13 versus Sternritter M the Miracle, Gerard Valkyrie, which feels completely all over the place. Running from chapter 654 to chapter 680, this is a long-running fight, albeit one that is very broken up too. Kubo's treatment of the Vizard in this fight is an unmitigated and well-documented disaster, so much so that the anime seems to be completely rewriting it, while the stage is set for the most popular captains, Byakuya, Kenpachi and Hitsugaya, to get yet another fight before the series ends. What's actually here regarding their fight, to be fair, is pretty good. I like seeing them trying to work together, and of course the fight is really just one huge engine for some major last-minute fan service. Kenpachi's bankai and Hitsugaya's matured bankai are rapidly revealed at a breathless pace, for example. Meanwhile, Gerard is maybe the least interesting member of the Schutzstaffel and probably deserved better. His concept and ability are actually pretty cool, and I think he makes sense as the final undying wall between the Shinigami and Yhwach, but we simply don't know enough about him. Ultimately, as he grows to a titanic size, he ends up just feeling like a punching bag in the service of letting the captains show off one last time. A Yami 2.0, if you will. And then of course there's the fight's incredibly rushed and unsatisfying ending, which again, I wonder if the anime will rework. Only time will tell. It's kind of weird that Hashwolf has two fights in the 1000 Year Blood War arc, and both of them are against other Quincy. However, unlike his battle against Uryu, his battle against Bazby, which spans from chapter 630 to chapter 634, is excellent, emotional, and surprisingly well written. Two friends turned mortal enemies are now pitted against each other, and even though it's clear Bazby doesn't really stand a chance, it's cool to see him utilising all aspects of his burner finger abilities as he grows more and more desperate. Of course, the friend flashback is the real crowning jewel of this battle, at last giving us some insight into both Yhwach Arc and the Sternritter's mysterious past. Again, as with many of the fights on this list, I only wish we'd gotten more. Though specifically, I mean more flashback this time, as I think the actual confrontation between Bazby and Hashwolf is paced pretty perfectly here. As we reach the end of the series itself, Orihime Inoue's character development comes full circle as she stands shoulder to shoulder with Ichigo against none other than the current Soul King himself, Yhwach Arc. From chapter 672 to chapter 680, Ichigo battles Yhwach Arc in the Quincy King's throne room, and demonstrates his incredible new power, in the shape of both his Horn of Salvation form, which melds his Shinigami and Hollow powers together in unison at long last, but also the true version of his Bankai Tensor Zangetsu. I really love this fight, for the first half or so anyway. Seeing Ichigo capable of duking it out with Yhwach Arc while Orihime protects and heals him is fantastic. It feels like they've both reached the place they should be, fighting side by side after so many years, wielding such immense power. Ichigo's Horn of Salvation form is pretty spectacular too, and feels like the first genuine step forward in the development of his power in some time, the fruits of the Blade is Me playing out before us. However, I think the fight falls off a cliff once Yhwach Arc activates the Almighty and reveals the true nature of its completely absurd and utterly broken ability. With Ichigo and Orihime now unable to do anything at all, the fight devolves from feeling dynamic and explosive and showing the best sides of everyone to just, well, future warping shenanigans. Yhwach Arc breaking Ichigo's new Bankai in half was a great twist at the time, and a genuinely jaw-dropping moment. However, that was back when I expected to then get a full showcase of the Bankai later on, but really it never happens, at least not in what feels like a truly built-up and satisfying way. This was the reveal of Tensor Zangetsu, and it completely falls flat in service of shock value. Then of course there's the new Tensor Zangetsu itself, which, and this is totally subjective, in my opinion, is by far the weakest design of Ichigo's Bankai to date. Shockingly so, at that. I can't believe how much better, for example, the Fullbring version of Tensor Zangetsu looks, from the outfit to the sword, compared to this. Considering the series ends 6 chapters later, it barely feels like the second half of this fight is worth the damage, especially considering the first half is almost everything I wanted from a fight of this scale at this stage in the story with these particular characters. Moving on, we have Sajin Komamura versus Sternritter E the Explode Bambietta Bastabine in this unexpectedly moving showdown. I've always been adamant that despite his perceived treatment of Komamura, Kubo is actually quite the fan of this character and has been wrestling with the Wolf Captain's relative lack of popularity for years, and this fight reinforces that idea. Komamura gets by far the best, most interesting storyline out of the Stolen Bankai subplot, and this battle against Bambietta, which spans chapter 554 to chapter 558, is fascinating. Having trained with his grandfather, Komamura has attained Jinka no Jutsu, the human transformation technique that is the secret of the Cursed Beast clan. By tearing out his heart in his quest to avenge Yamamoto's death, Komamura has acquired an immortal human form, a twist that I remember audibly gasping at back in the day. Yes, this fight isn't particularly long, and yes, it's yet another battle that is just too one-sided to be truly engaging, as Komamura and his twisted new bankai completely dominate Bambietta, but Komamura's sacrifice, his downfall, and the themes of this battle are expertly handled all the same. It's a somber, Pyrrhic affair that speaks to the way even good men can be corrupted. On the other side of the spectrum, we've got a fight that's all about the spectacle, and that's Kenpachi Zaraki vs Sternritter V the Visionary Gremmy Thamo at the midpoint of the second invasion. Stretching all the way from chapter 572 to chapter 579, I've made my issues with this fight known over the years. Gremmy isn't really a character so much as he exists in a vacuum purely to allow Kenpachi to reveal his Shikai. Not only that, but this fight ends as soon as it actually gets going. The pacing feels off in a big way. And speaking of the ending, well, I can't help but think it's just a little stupid even today. But this battle makes up for it in a big way thanks to a number of different factors. First of all, Gremmy's absurd power of the Visionary allows for some truly fun and novel imagery, from waves of lava and a barrage of artillery to the fabric of space itself, and of course a giant meteor that threatens to obliterate the Serete. Then there's Kenpachi himself, who shows real growth in this battle. Having killed Unohana and acquired the title of Kenpachi, he feels more respectful, more disciplined, and overall more aware of his standing here than ever before, and it's really cool. I especially love the dynamic that fosters between the two opponents as Kenpachi tries to mentor Gremmy on what it means to be the strongest in the midst of the fight. Plus, of course, the long-awaited, much-anticipated reveal of Kenpachi's Shikai Nozarashi is handled fantastically, really in the only way it could be. It's cinematic, it's explosive, and it looks amazing. It's just a shame the fight is over in the very next chapter. Alright, but before we start with the top 10, if you've made it this far into the video, thank you all so very much. I just want to again briefly take the time to plug Mr. Tomo Talks Games, where I have reworked the channel, reworked the content into something ultimately more satisfying, more compelling, and more engaging for me to make. Somewhere where I can really bring forth my passion for games and the games I play, the games I'm looking forward to. So if you haven't done already, please do consider going over there, checking out the latest video on a small game called Sword of the Sea. We'll be looking at all kinds of games in smaller format videos and long form critiques as well. Big blockbuster AAA titles and smaller ones like this one, Sword of the Sea, to get us started. So if that does sound interesting to you, or if you just want to go over there to help support me, I really would appreciate it either way. Right, enough of the shameless plug, back to the top 10 best fights of the 1000 Year Blood War Arc manga. Alright, but we've made it to the top 10. These are the 10 best fights in the 1000 Year Blood War Arc manga. Kicking things off, we have the desperate struggle for control of Waco Mundo as Ichigo teams up with the Arrancar to take on Sternritter J the Jail Kirige OP, a sinister Quincy bent on subjugating the Hollows. In many ways, this fight, which runs from chapter 487 to chapter 500, represents much of what I really wanted from the 1000 Year Blood War arc moving forward, and much of what I think is really the arc's best material. Of course, much has been said of Kirige OP. He's a brilliant, effective villain, not only one of the purest representations of the Quincy in the arc, but of unstoppable, unrelenting evil too. He callously defeats Loli, Menoli, the Trebestia, and Ion in a way that feels not just believable but terrifying as well. No matter what, he will not go down, and Ichigo taking him on, standing on the side of the Arrancar, is just a perfect display of where the story has come. I like how grounded this fight feels, but how at the same time it feels so all-encompassing as well. This is easily one of the biggest feeling fights of the arc, how connected it is to the evolving story around it. More than most other battles, you understand the stakes at play here, even though Kirige is no match for Ichigo and he knows it, and that's incorporated nicely into the battle. He'll stop at nothing to achieve his mission, and Ichigo's very real concerns, despite his power, are born out of facing a truly relentless and devoted enemy, the likes of which he's never really seen. Kirige is the epitome of the Vandenrijk's military persona, and his conquest of Hueco Mundo is masterfully handled from start to finish. In ninth place, we have the very final battle in all of Bleach, so far anyway, being Ichigo, Aizen, Renji, and Uryu versus Yhwach in the demolished ruins of the Serete. As the final showdown of the series, it would have been nice to have been able to rank this even higher, but the truth is this fight is deeply flawed. For starters, it's rushed and incredibly short, running only from chapter 682 to chapter 684. Time was well and truly up. There's just far too much baggage here, far too much to unpack, far too much at stake, to truly do it any form of justice in the space of barely 3 chapters. Not only that, but the battle comes to an end thanks to the controversial Deus Ex Machina, the Still Silver Arrow, which I've gone on record before, by the way, saying I don't really mind that much. It's far from the most egregious Deus Ex Machina in the series or even in the arc. But it does need to be explained in the anime how Yhwach doesn't see Uryu's attack coming, because right now it doesn't really make any sense. Aside from that though, this is a heart-pumping, adrenaline-fueled wild ride of a finale, as Aizen is freed from his chair to take Yhwach on himself in what I can only describe as feeling like wonderful fanfiction come true. Renji's inclusion is, admittedly, extremely weird, to the point of going unexplained as well, but seeing Ichigo and Aizen fighting together is fantastic. The reveal that Ichigo was in fact Aizen all along, and that Aizen's Kyokusuigetsu works on Yhwach's the Almighty, is brilliant as well. A top-tier Kubo curveball that cements Aizen's place as a truly legendary Bleach character, while we do get to see, albeit very briefly, the true power of Ichigo's Tensa Zangetsu in action. This is definitely one of the Thousand Year Blood War arc's weirdest fights, make no mistake, a Frankenstein mishmash of characters and circumstances, but it's great all the same, and I hope the anime has big plans for it too. Alright, but moving on, in 8th place, we have a fight that truly feels as though it has some real emotional weight behind it, some real stakes, due to events that previously transpired in the same arc. And of course I'm talking about Rukia Kuchiki versus Sternritter F. the Fear, Äs Nödt, the grudge match that, let's face it, everyone wanted to happen. After Äs Nödt eviscerated Byakuya with his own bankai in the first invasion and left the captain for dead, the community rallied around the idea of Rukia being the one to eventually take down the terrifying Sternritter, and that's exactly what happens. Taking place from chapter 566 to chapter 570, Rukia, having returned from the royal palace, is confronted by the unnerving Quincy, who has returned to seek out Byakuya and finish the job. Despite Rukia unlocking the true power of her Sode no Shirayuki, this fight doesn't feel anywhere near as one-sided as Renji's prior battle with Mask, and instead, both sides manage to get one up on the other in a way that feels organic. Äs Nödt's Volsten dish is the best of the bunch bar none, with a phenomenal design, worthy of a character whom has already produced some of Kubo's best imagery to date, while Rukia continues to show why she's the series' best female character, standing firm against the fear as much as she can. Even though she's rescued from the jaws of defeat by Byakuya, the battle and the victory belong wholly to Rukia, who, overcoming fear, unleashes her bankai. Again, something the community had been hoping to see for many years, and finishes off Äs Nödt once and for all. Haka no Togame is a genuine masterpiece of a design by Kubo, and caps off a satisfying duel in the best possible way. And yet Rukia vs Äs Nödt wouldn't hit anywhere near as hard without the battle that preceded it. Byakuya and Renji versus Äs Nödt and Masked Masculine in the first Quincy invasion was unlike anything we'd ever seen before in Bleach. A complete and total failure on the part of the Shinigami, one that helped to set the tone for that first devastating battle perfectly. Spanning from chapter 495 to chapter 502, albeit broken up in the middle, this fight, and specifically Äs Nödt, was our first real introduction to the Sternritter outside of Kyrie, and Kubo ensured it was a memorable one. Byakuya falls victim to having his bankai stolen by Äs Nödt, who then uses his power of the fear to cripple the captain. As Renji attempts to rescue Byakuya, Äs Nödt unleashes the full force of Senbonzakura Kageyoshi, culminating in a shocking sequence that left my jaw on the floor back in the day. The sheer desperation of watching Byakuya be shredded to pieces, of knowing there's absolutely nothing that can be done to stop it. Renji attempts to intervene, but has his Zanpakuto torn in half by Masked Masculine, who then drop kicks him across the Serete. Byakuya was a very deliberate choice to fall on Kubo's part, a stalwart defender of the Gotei 13 and one who very rarely loses fights, and practically never relinquishes his calm demeanour. This was the perfect way to upend our expectations and shake off our false sense of security. Whether Byakuya should have died or not, though, remains a subject of debate to this very day. Just missing out on the top 5, we have the blood-soaked, destined duel of the strongest, Kenpachi Zaraki versus Yachiru Unohana, and yet another battle that, when I was reading the manga weekly, I could scarcely believe was real. We'd waited a very long time to learn the truth about Unohana, the mysterious matronly captain who appeared to be little more than a kind-hearted healer. Except those in the know understood that she was genuinely terrifying and authoritative, and when it was suddenly revealed that she was in fact the first ever Kenpachi, and a criminal swordsmaster, well, everything changed. This is a weird fight though. Taking place between chapter 523 and chapter 527, Unohana massacres Kenpachi over and over again, revealing that Zaraki has been subconsciously locking down his true strength for centuries, and the only way to unlock it is to take him to the brink of death and back again. So in a sense, it's an unorthodox, glorified training session. Yes, it would have been nice to see Unohana let loose against a Sternritter, but Kubo promised her a fight, and here it is. There's no denying that the reveal of Unohana's true nature completely transformed our perception of her and elevated her standing overnight. So much so that her dying to further Kenpachi's power was perhaps a much bigger disappointment for people than I think Kubo really expected. But this is a genuinely solid exchange. There's swift, masterful swordplay on show, a new, albeit unclear bankai reveal, and a tantalizing look into the past, as the secrets of their relationship, including some possibly even romantic undercurrents, or at the very least, romance in the sense of two characters brought together by fate who share an unparalleled love of the battle, blossom amidst the blood. So here we are, these are the big 5, the 5 best fights of the 1000-Year Blood War Arc manga. And up first, in 5th place, we have the ultimate culmination of the first Quincy invasion, and of really the first 1,000 years of the Gotei 13, in Yamamoto versus Sternritter Y the Yourself Roidloid, who has disguised himself as Yhwach in an attempt to fool the head captain. And it works. Over the course of several chapters, running from chapter 505 to chapter 511, Yamamoto launches everything he has at Roid, including his long-awaited Bankai Zanka no Tachi. Honestly, it seemed an impossible feat. How would Kubo ever create something truly capable of working as a Bankai for Ryujin Jaka of all Zanpakuto? Well, he managed it, and it turns out the answer was throwing everything at the wall and cranking the heat up to 11. Zanka no Tachi is a tremendous success, and throughout this battle we're subjected to Yamamoto's terrifying power again and again, as he conjures up the heat of the sun, raises an army of the charred dead, and even removes chunks of earth from existence with a swing of his sword. This fight is maybe the purest form of spectacle in perhaps the entire manga, and it pays homage to Yamamoto perfectly, before the real Yhwach arc arrives and cruelly robs him of his power, leading to the ancient Shinigami's solemn death. While this is an amazing fight, and artistically I mean this is some of Kubo's best work ever, I can't help but want for a little more. Now I know that's greedy, but this would have been the absolute perfect opportunity to show us some of that original war that took place 1,000 years ago, but there's nothing like that here. In fact, there's practically no history here, which is really weird considering this fight is essentially the modern day equivalent of the entire arc's namesake. Or at least, you think it is. It ends up feeling a little shallow, therefore, as a result, style over substance, an opportunity to really just show off Yamamoto's bankai before he dies, and look, ultimately I'm not going to say no to that. Then there's the issue of Royd, which is a bigger issue in my opinion, and the deception surrounding the fight's finale. I've gone on record before saying I don't like this reveal. I think this reveal undermines the fight and takes away from it in retrospect, which I guess is maybe the idea. But honestly, it is the final arc, and I think it would have been way more impactful to simply have the real Yhwach arc defeat Yamamoto for real after a very hard-fought battle. But it wasn't to be. Still, it's an astoundingly effective showcase, and the anime version does in fact elevate this fight in many ways, but perhaps most of all thanks to the incorporation of the historical context that was sorely missing here. Just missing out on the top 3 fights of the 1,000-year Blood War arc, we have the last remaining fight on this list that's yet to be animated. And that's Kisuke Urahara Yoroichi Shihoin Yushiro Shihoin and Grimjo Jaeger-Jaquez vs Askin Naklavar. Honestly, I would love to put this fight in the top 3. Askin is my favourite Sternritter, and Kisuke is one of my favourite characters in the series. The two of them together is a match made in heaven as far as I'm concerned. But there's a lot to unpack here with this fight, and it feels quite inconsistent across the board. Overall, it's excellent, don't get me wrong, or else it wouldn't be here in 4th, but there's an unshakable feeling that this fight is very much the beginning of the end. Things are starting to feel rushed, and there's a lack of depth to this battle that simply isn't found with some of the superior Varvelt offerings. Running from chapter 656 to chapter 666, there is so much going on in this battle. Ichigo, Chad, and Orihime are instantly defeated by Askin, who is then confronted by Yoroichi and her little brother Yushiro. It's much too late to do anything about it now, not that we as fans ever could, but I think we can all agree that Yushiro should have been Soifon in this fight, right? Anyway, we get a cool showing of the extent of the Shihoin family's mastery of Shunko first and foremost, while Askin's power of the death dealing, as I mentioned earlier, is simplified greatly and made way more suitable for the medium here. Essentially, if you hit him without killing him in a single move, he'll then become immune to said power, creating an interesting situation for the heroes to try and circumvent. While on the flip side, he can poison you. It's pretty clear-cut, and a far cry away from the abstract and long-winded explanation we got against Oetsu. Once Yushiro goes down, Yoroichi is inexplicably beaten by Askin off-screen before Kisuke comes to her rescue. From here, Kisuke and Yoroichi team up to take on the Sternritter, first using the transformed power of Yoroichi's Shunko, and then Kisuke is forced to fight alone for the final stretch. While the whole battle is good, it's really this last portion of 3 or so chapters that I truly love, and I genuinely wish there was much more to dig into here. Kisuke and Askin play off of each other so well, and of course the reveal of Kisuke's bankai, one of the most anticipated bankai reveals of the entire series, is brilliant, albeit again a little hasty, but the bankai itself is perhaps my favourite of them all. Unlike its contemporaries, this fight doesn't feature any flashbacks, which sticks out like a sore thumb, coming off the heels of Mayuri vs Pernida and Kyoraku vs Lille, and definitely strips the battle of some of its weight. Still, this is a fantastic fight, and the ending is wholly satisfying, at least I think, as Grimjo tears out Askin's heart in a single fatal move. But moving on to the top 3 now, and first of all we have Mayuri and Nemu Kurotsuchi versus Sternritter C, the compulsory Pernida Pankajaz, one of the longest consecutive fights in the arc, running from chapter 635 to chapter 644. This fight kind of came out of nowhere, and I can't imagine anyone was really expecting it to be anywhere near as good as it was back in the day. I know I certainly wasn't. In fact, I was kind of exasperated at the thought of another Mayuri fight, and so soon after his battle with Giselle. I was intrigued by the prospect of Pernida, sure, this very weird, mysterious, hooded Sternritter with a strange power was exciting, but I could never have really envisioned what was to come. Pernida being the left arm of the Soul King at first glance feels almost too weird. It feels like a potential jump the shark moment. Mayuri is literally fighting a giant sentient arm that shoots arrows out of its fingertips, it speaks, it has a big eyeball in its palm. How do we get here? But take a step back and you realise just how perfect this really is. The themes of science versus divinity, versus religion even, are broadly on show here. Mayuri, as he notes himself, is actively in the process of making an earth-shattering discovery on the battlefield, and it is so cool to see him in his element in this way. But it's even cooler to see him struggling to stay alive against an all-powerful opponent that is pushing him to the very brink. Pernida really shocked everyone with how oppressive it turned out to be, and despite being a long fight, this battle is paced really well. It's never boring, and it's mostly due to Pernida's adaptability and evolution that constantly keeps things interesting, and keeps Mayuri on the back foot. I love Mayuri, but Mayuri fights had grown pretty stale by this point, and I remember actively hoping he would at least take some damage here, and Kubo seemed to have got the message. Mayuri is pressured in a huge way throughout this fight as Pernida changes and surprises at every turn, and the battle is full of great moments. From Mayuri severing one of Pernida's fingers with an explosion, only for the finger to suddenly come to life and sprout an entirely new hand, almost catching Mayuri off guard to the point where he's forced to destroy his own arm. To Pernida being devoured by Mayuri's reworked bankai, only to then acquire said bankai's ability to shed its skin, later freeing itself and surprising the mad scientist on the fly yet again. It's a dynamic, exciting battle against an insurmountable force that requires absolutely everything Mayuri can muster and more, just to try and stay ahead. But of course, the heart and soul of the battle belongs to Nemu, who evolves in her own way throughout the fight, transforming and revealing the fruits of her growth in such a fashion as to be able to take over the duel once Mayuri is nearly killed. Nemu's sacrifice and shocking death, combined with a few wonderful glimpses into her history, successfully humanises one of the series' most notoriously evil characters, and this entire fight is a masterclass in layering character, themes, and action, making it easily one of the best of not just the arc, but the whole series. But our runner-up for the best fight of the 1000-Year Blood War arc was a tough decision to make, and I'm honestly still not sold on it. Earlier when I was planning the video, this fight was wearing the crown, but I eventually knocked it down a peg. It's still utterly fantastic, of course, but I'm not sure it has all the right pieces to truly be considered the absolute best of the best. So in second place today is a true clash of the titans, the ultimate showdown between Shinigami and Quincy, and by far the crown jewel of the manga version of the invasion of the royal palace. It's Ichibei Hyosabe versus Yhwach. Yes, taking place between chapter 604 and chapter 611, this fight lets loose the leaders of both sides, as Ichibe steps up on the very walkway to the Soul King's palace, determined to keep Yhwach from entering. In the manga, the battle between the Zero Division and the Schutzstaffel was essentially sacrificed at the altar of this fight, and to be honest, the trade-off was worth it. I've said it before, but if you had told me, back in 2012, that one day the leader of the Zero Division would battle the Quincy King at the footsteps of the Soul King's palace, I simply wouldn't have believed you. It would have sounded like some wonderful fever dream. But we got it, and it was glorious. This battle between two unstoppable forces gave Kubo the chance to really go all out, to really flex, and it shows. Ichibe's Zanpakuto Ichimonji translates better to the page than maybe any other ability, because by essentially controlling ink, there is a meta layer to this power, as though the monk himself is writing and drawing the very story that we are reading. Ink is used so masterfully throughout this battle to create some of the most striking images in the entire series, and Kubo makes the very most out of the manga medium, to both illustrate Ichibe's power, but also his creativity. And Ichibe truly is powerful, with abilities capable of rewriting those and the world around him. Where the other Zero Division members disappointed us in a big way, Ichibe practically carried them during their darkest hour, displaying exactly why he was alone at the top of the food chain. Whether he was locking weapons with Yhwach, casting secret Hardo spells, or quite literally forcing Yhwach's Reiatsu out of his veins with sheer heft, Ichibe is on top form throughout, even stealing the very knights from the future of the Soul Society to create an inescapable mausoleum that removes you from the cycle of rebirth. I mean, it cannot get any more awesome than that. Kubo knew he had a limited amount of time to depict the raw strength, the godly strength of the Zero Division's leader, and he took it by the horns. But perhaps the best thing about this showdown is that despite Ichibe's unfathomable power, it doesn't feel completely one-sided. Only a little one-sided. But Yhwach absolutely puts up a fight, and uses pretty much every ability in his wide arsenal to try and overthrow his enemy. This is what Yamamoto versus Royd should have been, to be totally honest. They do feel like a genuine force to be reckoned with, and this feels like a divine battle at the gateway to heaven. I only really have a few issues with this battle, and they are fairly minor. But to begin with, like the fight between Yamamoto and Royd, this would have been ripe for some history, some much needed context. The relationship between Ichibe and Yhwach is merely hinted at, but Kubo should have gone much further with it, and this was the time. And as is something of a recurring issue with this arc, I don't much care for the end of this fight either. Yhwach suddenly unlocking the Almighty doesn't really make any sense whatsoever in the manga. It was only thanks to the anime that it even seemed possible, thanks to the revelations we got in episode 24 about Ichibe and Yhwach's meeting 1,000 years ago. And to make matters worse, he then just obliterates Ichibe without so much as breaking a sweat. It's totally unsatisfying as a capstone to such an otherwise exhilarating and momentous showdown. However, there can be only one winner, and this might be a controversial pick. Like I said, even I'm not sure where I stand on this, but right now, as of the time of writing, Kyoraku Shunsui and Nanao Issei vs Sternritter X the X-Axis Lille Barrow feels like the pinnacle of what fights have to offer in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. Let's rip the band-aid off right now. Once again, the battle has a disappointing ending. Nanao's Zanpakuto the Shinken Hakyoken is a deus ex machina that in my opinion is actually more egregious than the Still Silver Arrow, coming out of literally nowhere to defeat the one single enemy in the series that only it could defeat, that could only be defeated by it. Were it virtually any other character in the entirety of Bleach, certainly any other Shinigami, Lille wouldn't have lost, and that's not great. And even though Lille is defeated, he isn't killed. Instead, his power rains down upon the Serete, and for some reason, the conclusion of this enormous fight is left to Izuru Kira of all characters, a resolution that isn't even wrapped up in the manga's remaining chapters. So there's no real closure here either. I guess this goes to show that no fight in the Thousand Year Blood War arc is completely 100% perfect. So yeah, that's a shame. But it's really only the final 2 chapters or so of an otherwise beautiful, evocative, emotional, dynamic, and exciting showdown that features some of the very best of what Kubo has to offer in any arc. This fight is actually very similar to our 3rd place pick, Mairi and Nemu vs Pernida, in that it's incredibly long. Spanning from chapter 644 to chapter 654, it is officially the longest unbroken fight in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and it features a heart-wrenching, in-depth backstory to help flesh the battle out, to help lay bare the stakes of the conflict. Honestly, if for you it comes down to this fight or Mairi's and you chose Mairi's, I'd hold my hands up and say that is completely fair. Hell, I'm aware I'm probably a little biased. It's my list after all. Kyoraku is my 2nd favourite character in the entire series. And there's undeniably something so cool about getting to see him, the new head captain, finally going all out. Katen Kyokotsu is one of the best, most ingenious and creative weapons in the series, and the first phase of this fight feels totally reminiscent of old school Bleach in the best possible way. At the start, Kyoraku and Lille gradually feel each other out. Kyoraku forces Lille to play a game, while the Sternritter uses his power to counter, and all the while they are conversing almost casually. And I have to say, I really like the X-axis too, for the most part. It gets a little wild later on, but initially it's super easy to understand, and the depth of its power is palpable. It feels dangerous, I guess that's the key. But of course, that dynamic instantly transforms and the tone of the battle shifts dramatically when Lille releases his Volsten dish. All of a sudden, things get serious and Kyoraku is forced onto the defensive. While both of their bankai were 2 of the most anticipated of the entire series, unlike Kisuke's, Kyoraku's bankai reveal doesn't feel rushed at all. Instead, it feels just right, with even the lead-in coming off as totally iconic and feeling very stereotypically Bleach, which I absolutely love, harking back to some of the most famous bankai reveals ever, like Ikkaku for example, that plays up all of my favourite tropes, as Kyoraku is truly pushed to the end of his rope after having exhausted all other options. And where it was considered a little obtuse and underwhelming initially, Katen Kyokotsu Karamatsu Shinju has aged very well too, only heightening the sense of theatrical drama and sinister flair that accompanies this battle, enforcing the darker half of Kyoraku's personality that's later emboldened, thanks to the deep, revealing insight we get into his past. Is it unsatisfying that after so very long, after so much waiting, Kyoraku's bankai ultimately fails? Yeah, I think it is. I think you are absolutely right if you feel that way, but it's still a sight to behold nonetheless. I've said it before, but annoyingly, I think it's so very easy to fix the faults of this fight while keeping it true to the original version. All you have to do is swap around the events as they play out, and I think you can make it make perfect sense. Have Nanao arrive prior to Kyoraku using bankai and reveal the Shinken Hakkyoken against Lille's initial Volsten dish. She reflects Lille's power back at him, but it doesn't defeat him. Instead, his body is seriously damaged and his power is fractured, cracked, forcing him to transform into the monstrosity he would later become. Thanks to Nanao, however, the Sternritter's godly power is now unstable, allowing Kyoraku to destroy him for good with his bankai in the end. Or if you want to keep the end exactly the same, at the very least the bankai is now able to be the one that sends Lille's power careening down to the Serete. That's just my 2 cents anyway. Regardless, both Kyoraku and Nanao come together in a way that feels moving and cathartic, and eventually the two of them do indeed take Lille down. There's so much to say about this fight, but in essence it does feel like the complete package. The backstory helps to deepen the themes that permeate the entire battle. There's much more to this than just the flash and style of the fight itself, though there's plenty of that too. In the end, the showdown between the leader of the Gotei 13 and the leader of the Schutzstaffel is almost too big for its own good. It almost takes on too much, and risks drowning beneath the weight of it all. Beautiful art, a melancholy whimsy, and dark, shadowy undertones, great choreography, wild transformations, and insane power-ups. But ultimately, I think it absolutely manages to coalesce and make it all work, issues and all, and comes away as the best battle of the 1000-Year Blood War arc. At least in the manga, anyway. Alright everyone, but that's it for this rather long video ranking what I think is hopefully every single battle of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, at least in the manga anyway. I didn't include certain fights, if you can even call them that, like for example Kenpachi taking out Jerome, Berenice and Lloyd, because it's not really a fight. Everything that happens in that battle takes place off screen, so that's why I didn't include confrontations like that. But if I did miss any of the actual battles, do please let me know down in the comments. Although after all this work, that will just serve to depress me. But either way, what's done is done. The video is here, and as always, I do hope you thoroughly enjoyed it and took something of value away from it as well. How do you feel about my ranking of these 34 fights? I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. What do you think about my winners? What do you think about my top 10, my top 5? My number 1 spot? I'd love to get all of your thoughts, so do please let me know. Like I said, guys, consider hitting subscribe down below if you want to support this kind of work, you want to support more of these kind of videos on the channel. I'd love to get your support. It does mean the absolute world to me. Do please check out the third and final plug for Mr. Tomo Talks Games and the way we've reworked the channel over there. Your support would mean everything. Again, the way I want to structure, the way I want to make content and videos over there is to focus less on it, well, being content, and more on it being something of real value, something that comes from the heart, that really showcases my passion for games. So if that speaks to you, I'd love to get your support over there as well. It really would make a huge difference. Alright everyone, I've talked for frankly far too long. So again, thank you so very much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed the video. A massive shout out and a huge everlasting thank you goes out to the people who are supporting me over on Patreon. It really is making a massive difference. It's a great help, and I really do appreciate each and every one of you so very much. All of you listed in the credits right now are helping to make this channel a reality, and it does mean so very much to me. I can barely even put it to words at this point, so thank you all once again. Alright guys, until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then. Rukia Kuchiki vs Sternritter F. The Fear, Äs Nödt, the grudge match that, let's face it, everyone wanted to happen. I've forgotten a fight.